Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Coal Iron channel. My name is Logan. I'm the design engineer here, and today we are doing the long-awaited install of the digital press controller on the benchtop series of presses. So we're just gonna dive right into it. We did a little bit of prep work ahead of time so we didn't have to bore you with the details, but essentially what we have here is a very recognizable, affordable tool cart that is just the right size for this kind of setup, so that's a great option to roll with. We added a black melamine top that's supported by a couple of 2x4s to give us a nice level table, and bolted the included mount bracket and the press frame itself all the way through into kind of the underside of this top here. So these are mounted nice and secure and stable to the cart. That's especially important with this bracket here because of the little bit of tilt that we included in the bracket. It's helpful to have this secured ahead of time so that when we start hanging the valve and the controller and everything off of it, it's not gonna wanna tip back on you. So we did that ahead of time. It's gonna be a nice secure platform that makes the rest of the install easier. So now we just have the standalone power pack that you hopefully already have in your shop. And we're gonna get into the tools that we have and the other supplies included, and then we'll start to get into breaking down the power pack. Okay, so included with our benchtop retrofit kit, we have the controller itself, obviously. We have the encoder, the joystick, and the foot pedal assembly already pre-wired and ready to go. We have the hardware kit, the valve itself. We included a couple of 50-inch half NPT hydraulic hoses because this will allow you to mount your power pack, in our case, on the bottom of the cart or separately from the press so that you don't have too much space taken up on your bench top. So we have those hoses, and then we have two different mount brackets that will go on the press frame itself. Now, as far as tools, a couple of things that are handy to have. You definitely need a 5/32 and a 5/16 Allen driver, so either an Allen key, or in this case, we've got hex drivers for our screw gun here. I've got a 3/4 inch socket. I've got a 22 millimeter and a 1-inch wrench, or a couple of adjustable wrenches would work as well. That's just to break the seals on our hydraulic hoses. And then I also have a couple of cups to drain oil into, a rag, some zip ties to be able to tie hoses out of the way so they don't drip, and then also a 2x4 that is gonna come in handy when it comes to replumbing the tank. So not a crazy amount of tools. I also have just some flush cutters there to cut the zip ties once we are done with them. So yeah, that's pretty much it for tools. It's pretty basic. And so I'm gonna move this stuff out of the way, and we'll get into unplumbing the tank so that we can plumb the valve into it. So the first thing we need to do to get this install done is replumb the power pack. So like I mentioned previously, we're gonna extend the hoses coming from the pump and returning to the tank. And then we're gonna swap this mechanical valve for the electronic valve that is used with the controller. So I'm going to, with a 3/16 Allen key, come down to the 3 mount bolts that secure the valve bracket to the tank here. And I'm gonna go ahead and undo those so that we can, the valve will be a little bit more manageable to unplumb once those are removed here. All right. So now that those are undone, we can lift the valve kind of up and over here. And hopefully that makes it a little bit more manageable. So you'll see you have a hose coming from the pump here at the end of your motor down to your pressure port on the valve. So we're gonna undo this. I'm gonna keep the valve facing down so that when I unplumb these hoses, I can lift them up and hopefully minimize the amount of spill of hydraulic oil coming out of them. I'm gonna grab our drip cups here just in case. And then this is where the 22 millimeter and the 1-inch wrenches come in handy. Again, if you have a couple of adjustables, that works fine too. I'm just gonna use these here on this swivel fitting. To break the seal on that. And then once that's loose, I can unthread this with my hand, and I'm just gonna, as soon as that pops out, I will shift the hose over to that port, which in this case, there was 1 drop of oil that came out, so we're kind of lucky. Depending on when the last time you had run your press will affect how much oil is hanging out in this hose here. But in that case, there was not very much. So I'll pull that guy out here. And I will also remove it from the pump itself. So we don't need this guy anymore, but we'll take one of the hoses that were included with the kit and plumb that into our pump here. And when it comes to tightening these, you want to go about 3/4 of a turn past finger tight. So there was about half of that. That's plenty tight there. You don't want to go too tight because you'll crush the O-ring that's inside that fitting. So that is the first hose installed. So next step is to do the same thing, but with our return hose. So we have our tank port here on the other side of the valve, and that goes into the side of the tank here. So when it comes to removing it from the valve, it's the same concept. This fitting is a little bit tighter. But you can kind of work it loose. I have this oil cup here just in case. And I'm not sure this press has actually been run, which explains why these hoses are mostly empty. So in your case, you'd have a lot more oil coming out, but that's why we are orienting the hoses like we are, so that they, when oil does spill out of them, we don't make a huge mess. So now that this hose is detached as well, this is where it really helps just to have a simple 2x4. So I'm gonna grab one of those real quick. Because of the side of the tank, where and the height of the tank that port is, our oil level is up past this fitting just barely. So if we were to unplumb this now, any oil that's above the height of that fitting would want to come out. So I am just going to tilt the power pack here without dropping it off the side of the table on the 2x4 on the tall side. So hopefully when I go to crack this hose, I am gonna have our other hose staged, ready to go just in case. But hopefully we bought ourselves enough headroom in the tank where we won't lose any oil. Yeah, we're good. So that's definitely the trick, is having the tank tilted up just like that. So I'll grab our other 50-inch hose. Thread this guy in. And again, giving it about a 1/2 to a 3/4 turn past finger tight is all it needs. Cool. So the tank is now prepped and ready to go to be placed in the bottom of the cart, and then we'll get on to attaching the valve to the back of the mount plate. Actually, we'll plumb the valve to the press frame first and then attach to the back of the mount plate, and then we'll be able to mount everything in and actually get the controller hung on there. So we're going to cut back once we put the tank underneath the cart and keep going. All right, so next up, we will unplumb the 2 work port hoses from the old valve and plumb them into the new one. So I have the electronic valve flipped over on its face here, so we have access to all the ports here and here. So it's easier to do this when it's standalone before we mount it to the press, at least for the 2 work ports here. So we'll go ahead and do that and then mount this to the frame, and then we can connect our hoses from the pump. So I'll go ahead and undo both of these. Not sure if there's oil in these hoses either, but a little bit. There's some oil, finally. So we'll just let that drain. Undo this other guy. Again, another reason why it's helpful to have the pump facing up, or all the ports facing up, so that you don't immediately lose all that oil. So we're gonna give these a couple minutes to drain out, and then we'll go ahead and plumb them into the new valve. So we'll cut back to that. Okay, so on our controller valve, this is the back side of it. The port coming straight out the top is on this subplate is labeled as the B port, and the port coming out the side with the elbow fitting is labeled as the A port. And so I kind of refer to A as the bottom port and B as the top port. And what we do when we plumb our cylinder is bottom to bottom, top to top. So I'm gonna take the top hose here, coming out of the press, and we're gonna plumb this into that B port, or the port with the straight fitting on it. Got that finger tight. I'll go ahead and get this other one. Actually, I'm gonna tighten that down so that the other hose isn't in my way. All right, that should be good. And then we're gonna take the bottom cylinder and kind of take out the twists in the hose so that they match the two hoses are matched in the amount of twist that's in them, and tighten that guy as well. Now, some people like to mount their 12-ton upside down and have it be a bottom acting press. There is support for that in the software of the controller, so you'll still want to follow the directions where we're plumbing this. And then if for whatever reason your press does run backwards, there's another easy fix for that. Okay, so the good news is the messy part of the job is behind us. So next, I'm gonna open up the hardware kit, grab the 4 3/8/16 socket head screws and their little bronze washers that we include with them to mount this to the back side of our controller mount plate on the bench here. Okay, so I actually got a little bit ahead of myself. We're gonna go ahead and mount the controller unit on the bracket first before we do the valve, just because it'll be a little bit easier to access those fasteners. So I'm going to take my screw gun with the extended socket driver. I've got a 5/32 Allen key here on the 1/4 screw with the washer already pre-staged onto it. Now, when it comes to hanging these controllers, it's a little bit awkward, but this is actually how we do it at the shop. I'll go ahead and open up the unit and rest it on a ledge or something, and then I will guide that first fastener into one of the top holes here, preferably the one in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll hang my thumb on the inside of this ledge here and pick up the whole unit just like that. It looks a little bit awkward, but it's actually pretty comfortable, and that allows me to guide that 1/4 fastener into that hole and get it started. If I leave the door open, it'll hang a little crooked, but just fine enough for us to get that second fastener and get that lined up and get those started. Be careful not to cross thread these. And I'll also, we'll get all 4 fasteners started in the holes before I tighten any of them down, just to make alignment a little bit easier. Now I'll go back through and make sure all 4 are tight. And then I will switch over to a 7/32 like long socket here and grab the other 4 nuts and washers that were included with the kit and swing around to the back side here. Now this might be a little bit overkill, but it's just a nice finished look for the threaded studs back here, as well as helps prevent them from walking out when the press and power pack vibrate during use. So I'll get these guys started on the back side here and tighten those down with that socket, just like that. So now the controller's hung, we can mount the valve to the back side of this bracket and get those final 2 hoses plumbed into place. So we'll do that right now. Okay, so now it's time to hang the valve on the back of the press. I've got my 5/16 hex driver in the screw gun with my 3/8/16 socket head screw with its little bronze washer staged ahead of time. Kind of similar way to how we hung the controller box. I'll grab it by this hose here, start with that upper right corner. And before I do this, I'm gonna preface, I twisted this valve like a half turn or a whole turn to preload some twist in these hoses, so they want to stay up out of the way of the dies of the press, so that as we're working hot steel through the press, we have no worries about scale or the actual hot workpiece coming in contact with these hoses. We'll also zip tie them up out of the way, but I just wanted to preface with the, it's helpful to actually take the valve assembly and give it a twist before doing that. So I'll grab it by the hose here, guide that first bolt in, get it started. And then same thing, just rinse and repeat with these other 4 bolts. And then we can plumb the final 2 hoses and be ready to install the encoder. So that is all snug. And I'll go ahead and run a couple zip ties. I'm gonna go through the top mounting holes, the unused mounting holes, I should say. You don't want too tight of a bend in these hoses, but about this radius is plenty fine, so you should be good to go with that. And I'll make sure these are nice and clean. Here, cool. So now we'll just plumb in the final 2 hoses and then install the encoder. The next step is to plumb our hoses into the valve. So you'll see that there's a T fitting here coming out the bottom of our valve. This is the return port or the tank port. And then up here, the other port that's connected to the pressure gauge itself is the pressure coming out of the pump. Now down here on the power pack, this is our pump here at the end of our motor. And so this hose coming out of the pump is our pressure pump, and then coming out of the side of the tank here is our return hose that will go to the bottom of the valve. So I'll go ahead and start threading these guys into place. I'm gonna start with the tank hose because it's a little bit easier to reach. So while I'm doing this, I will mention, we just listed quick couple fittings on our website. Now, if you are taking your 12-ton to shows, or you move it around the shop frequently, or you want to use your power pack to power other machines, the Quick Connect is just a male-female couple that doesn't leak hydraulic fluid when you detach them. So similar to a air hose, how you'd have those air fittings, same thing, except it does seal both ends of the hose, so there's no hydraulic oil loss. So when we use those around the shop, we'll actually quick connect pretty much every port around a valve. So we can either pull a power pack off and go use it in something else, or we can pull just the work port hoses off and plug them directly into a different cylinder to power that. It's just a nice versatile way to, we have something that's a couple 100 pounds attached to something that's almost 100 pounds attached to something that's a couple 100 pounds. So if you want to be able to move this around the shop, or if it's not on wheels, being able to move each component individually would be super nice, and Quick Connects will allow you to do that really, really quickly and evenly. So definitely check those out. Link either in the description below, or if you're watching this on our website, we'll put it in the product description on the page that it's on as well. So be sure to check that out. It's a great option if you need to be able to quick connect your fittings. So now that I have the tank port plumbed into the bottom of the valve and the pressure port plumbed into the side of the valve here, finger tight. Again, I'm just gonna go 1/2 to 3/4 turn pass. Finger tight. And we should be good to go. It is definitely a little tight. If you did do this with the valve off the bracket, this part would be easier, but you'd want to make sure that you're still putting a little bit of twist into those hoses so that they're tucked up and out of the way. That's good to go. Okay, so the last thing to be mounted to the press is the actual encoder itself. So I did have to cut this zip tie that I put on earlier, but we have 2 brackets here included. This is the top bracket and this is the slide bracket. So we'll start with the top here, and we'll just align those guys up so that this edge is flush and those holes line up with those slots. Take 2 flange head screws included with the kit and a couple of 3/8/16 nuts. And I will tighten those down with a wrench here. The slide bracket is just a surface to stick the magnet for the encoder to. So what we're going to do is take a 3/4 inch drive ratchet here, and I'm going to break the torque on the slide assembly screws here. It's important to do this on the side opposite from your hoses because the encoder will go down where the hoses would normally come across. So whichever side your hoses are not on is where we're going to be mounting this. And so that everything doesn't fall out, I'm actually going to get this bracket started before I pull the other one here. So I'm just going to take that bottom screw, apply it here, just get it not torqued down obviously, but just started. And then I will We do use a wicking grade Loctite on these parts, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to reapply some prior to reinstalling these bolts. Make sure those are nice and tight. Cool. So, now we need to install the actual encoder itself. So it comes in this little cardboard box. And I'll just get these started. This is actually an M5 bolt here. So we'll need a metric hex driver to tighten that down. But all we're gonna do is drop this guy in here, get that started. And I will tighten those down really quick. But before we do that, I'll pull our string encoder down and connect the magnet to that bracket. And what I'm gonna do is visually take a step back and make sure, looking at it front facing and side facing, that that cord is straight up and down as much as possible. Because that'll give us the most accurate and consistent reading across the board. Once that's squared away, I will cut this little zip tie and install the M12 connector here in the encoder port on the underside of the press. And while I'm down here, I'll grab the lead off of the valve here, the 4-pin lead, and wire that into the valve port. And we're nearly there. I'll grab the joystick and foot pedal and plug those into the corresponding remote switch ports. Doesn't matter which of the two ports you wire those into. That's why we labeled them as remote control, is you can actually go either direction on which one goes where. And the cool thing about our latest version of our joystick is this mag switch here. So because we no longer have a mechanical linkage operating our valve, we can put this wherever we want. So if I hang this guy on the front of the controller here and flip that switch, it'll stay put. Or if I, maybe not as useful on an H-frame style press, but on a C-frame, you can come around the front of the press and mount it over to the side or whatever you need. So, you could even go down here or whatever's most comfortable for you. So always a great option to be able to move that around. I'll grab our foot pedal here. Get that guy connected. All right, so I ran an extension cord, got our power cord connected to the controller, plugged that in, plugged in the press power. So now it's time to function check. So I'll go ahead and throw the controller on. And while that's loading, I'll mention I have this mounted in a top acting position, meaning that the fixed die is on the bottom and the cylinder is acting down from the top. So I'm just gonna go ahead and double check in our settings menu on our controller that we're in top acting mode. If you have your press mounted the other way with the slide rising instead of coming down from the top, if you hit that swap button, it'll swap into bottom acting mode and everything should be good to go. So press is looking good. I don't have dies in the press right now, but I can still function check everything. Go ahead and fire this up. Zero my press here. And we'll pop into spring return real quick and see how she runs. Awesome. Spring return works great. This press is a little dry, so we need to add some lube and work it in, but other than that, it'll run great. So that's working great. So I'll set this at, say, 3 inches here, and we'll put this at 2.8. So we have a 200 thousandths gap. Switch it into auto mode. Runs like a champ. So there you have it. We've got a fully functional, self-contained bench top 12-ton with a controller on a rolling cart, ready to move for us anywhere in our shop to be used, and ready to do some forging. So hope you guys enjoyed watching this install process. If you have any questions, please reach out to info@coleiron.com and we'll be happy to help walk you through it. Really excited to get these out on the market and for all you 12-ton users to take that 12-ton to the next level. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.